Sara Blakely began Spanx with a problem that looked too small for venture capital and too practical for fashion mythology. In 2000, in Atlanta, she cut the feet from a pair of control-top pantyhose because she wanted the smoothing effect without the visible lines and awkwardness. The critical question was not merely whether the product worked. It was whether a simple product could become a meaningful business without surrendering control before the market understood it. Blakely had no fashion industry background and invested $5,000 of personal savings. That decision placed Spanx inside a different financing model. Bootstrapping means building a company primarily through personal resources and operating revenue, rather than relying on outside equity investors. Venture capital, by contrast, is investment provided by specialized firms in exchange for ownership, usually with expectations of rapid expansion and a substantial future return. The absence of venture capital was therefore not simply a missing resource. It shaped the company's operating logic. Blakely had to handle early sales, packaging, demonstrations, and retailer outreach herself. Each task was laborious, but each also kept her close to the customer. That proximity mattered because shapewear was not an obvious purchase for everyone. Customers had to understand what the product did, how it differed from ordinary hosiery, and why its practical value justified trying something unfamiliar. The first obstacle was not manufacturing at scale or international distribution. It was customer education. Spanx had to communicate an invisible benefit, a smoother appearance beneath clothing. Traditional advertising could describe that benefit, but direct demonstrations made it easier to grasp. Blakely's early selling process connected product explanation with customer feedback, allowing the brand to develop around an observed problem rather than an abstract market forecast. That approach produced a strategic advantage, but not an effortless one. Founder-led selling is difficult to scale because it depends on personal energy, judgment, and repeated explanation. A company can learn quickly through such contact, yet it can also become overly dependent on the founder's presence. Spanx's early model created knowledge and credibility while simultaneously raising a future question. How could that education be transferred to retailers, packaging, and a broader brand system? Neiman Marcus became an important early test. The retailer's interest gave Spanx access to a recognized sales environment, but placement alone could not guarantee understanding or demand. A new product still had to earn attention among familiar alternatives. The breakthrough was consequential because it moved Spanx from a personal demonstration into a retail context, where the company's message had to survive without Blakely standing beside every customer. That transition reveals why packaging was more than a cosmetic decision. Packaging had to perform part of the sales conversation. It needed to explain the product's purpose quickly, distinguish it from ordinary hosiery, and make the unfamiliar category feel accessible. In a bootstrapped company, such tools carried unusual weight. Limited capital increased the value of every customer contact and every piece of communication that could educate without requiring a large sales force. The company's brand identity developed under the same constraint. Without venture investors directing an accelerated expansion plan, Blakely retained control over the timing and tone of growth. That control did not eliminate risk. It meant that decisions about distribution, messaging, and product presentation remained closely connected to the founder's interpretation of customer needs. The resulting brand could be shaped deliberately, rather than optimized immediately for the preferences of external capital providers. Oprah Winfrey's endorsement expanded the stakes. Her recognition brought Spanx to a much larger public audience and gave the product a form of cultural validation that paid advertising could not easily replicate. Yet endorsement is not a business model by itself. It can create attention, but the company still needs the capacity to serve demand, explain the product, and preserve trust after the initial visibility fades. Spanx's earlier discipline made that attention more useful. The popular version of the story often treats Oprah's endorsement as the decisive moment. A closer analysis places it within a sequence. The product had already been developed around a concrete wardrobe problem. Early selling had revealed the importance of demonstration. Neiman Marcus had provided a retail test. The endorsement amplified an existing proposition. It did not create the proposition from nothing. Strategic timing mattered because exposure arrived after the company had learned how to frame the product. This is where the financing choice becomes more significant. Venture capital can provide money, expertise, and access, but it also introduces a shared ownership structure. Investors generally seek growth large enough to justify the risk across their portfolio. A founder who bootstraps may face slower expansion and heavier personal responsibility, yet may retain greater authority over when to hire, where to distribute, and how aggressively to broaden the product line. That trade-off is especially important in categories requiring explanation. If customers do not immediately understand a product, rapid distribution can produce disappointing results rather than efficient scale. More stores do not automatically solve a communication problem. In Spanx's case, controlling customer education helped align product discovery with brand identity. The company could refine how the product was introduced before treating broad availability as the primary objective. The model also limited what Spanx could do. Blakely had to absorb the less glamorous work that outside capital might have funded sooner, including sales outreach, packaging decisions, and retailer communication. Growth could not be assumed simply because the idea was compelling. Every expansion raised operational questions about supply, consistency, and the ability to maintain a coherent customer experience. Bootstrapping protected timing, but it did not remove the friction of execution. As Spanx expanded, founder control became both an asset and a governance challenge. A business can preserve its original voice when ownership remains concentrated, but concentration also places substantial decision-making weight on one leader. The larger the company becomes, the more difficult it is to preserve informal methods of communication and founder-led judgment. Systems must eventually carry what personal involvement once supplied. The broader industry lesson concerns disruptive innovation, a term describing an innovation that changes how a market serves customers, often by making an overlooked solution more accessible. Spanx was not disruptive because it required advanced technology. Its significance lay in reframing a familiar category around a clearer consumer problem and a more direct explanation. The innovation was commercial as much as technical. Product, message, packaging, and demonstration reinforced one another. That combination also clarifies why ownership mattered. A company's brand is not only a logo or advertising style. It is a set of expectations about who the product is for, what problem it solves, and how confidently it communicates its value. By controlling Spanx's early direction, Blakely could protect that identity while the market was still learning the category. The strategy favored coherence over the appearance of immediate scale. The case does not prove that venture capital is harmful or that every founder should reject it. Outside capital can be essential when manufacturing, research, regulation, or network effects demand large early investment. Spanx presented a different economic situation: a relatively simple product, a need for customer education, and a founder able to perform many early commercial functions herself. The relevant question was not whether capital was available, but whether its conditions matched the company's stage. Spanx therefore offers a more precise lesson than the usual bootstrapping success story. Sara Blakely's strategic choice connected financing with learning. Personal ownership supported direct contact with customers. Direct contact improved education. Education strengthened the brand, and controlled growth protected timing. Each link carried costs, and none guaranteed success. But together they created an architecture in which the company could understand its market before inviting the market to define it. The lasting significance of Spanx is not that a founder built a major brand without venture capital. It is that funding shaped what the company could notice, how quickly it had to grow, and who controlled the interpretation of customer demand. Blakely's journey demonstrates that capital is a strategic instrument, not an automatic solution. In some businesses, the most valuable early advantage is not speed. It is the freedom to learn carefully, communicate clearly, and scale only when the product and the customer are ready.